world burned, not with the fleeting fire of rebellion, nor the brief chaos of mortal conflict, but with the consuming immolation of a planet at war. From orbit, its surface was little more than a seething expanse of molten scars and drifting ash. Vast clouds of smoke coiled upward, turning the heavens into a swirling canvas of ruin. Through those clouds descended the transports of the Imperium, black silhouettes against crimson skies, their hulls streaked with re-entry fire as they pierced the atmosphere like meteors guided by divine wrath. Each vessel carried men and women who knew neither glory nor mercy, only orders. They were the soldiers of the Astra Militarum, the hammer of the Emperor, humanity's countless legions, born from dust and despair, yet burdened with the defense of 1,000,000 worlds. To the casual eye, they were nothing. Unnumbered mortals, clad in flak armor and armed with rifles that had changed little in 10,000 years. But within their ranks lay the truest measure of the Imperium's strength. They were not space marines, nor the towering engines of the Adeptus Mechanicus. They were men of soil and smoke who learned to fight not because of divine blessing, but because survival demanded it. From the moment they stepped off the Valkyries and Landers, the air was thick with radiation and screams. The smell of promethium clung to their uniforms. The heat of bombardment seared their lungs, yet they advanced, rank upon rank, boots sinking into mud slick with blood and oil. Long before this world's ruin, before the endless wars that defined the age of the Imperium, humanity had waged battles across the stars under a banner of conquest. In the time of the Great Crusade, the Emperor had led his sons to unite the scattered tribes of mankind. The Legiones Astartes, his angels of death, were the instruments of that unification, perfect soldiers bred for victory. But when the galaxy turned upon itself, when brother fought brother in the madness of the Horus heresy, the Emperor's dream fractured into dust. In the centuries that followed, there could be no more perfect armies, no more legions of demigods. Humanity's survival would fall to those who could be replaced, those whose deaths did not matter so long as the line advanced. Thus was born the Astra Militarum, not from glory, but from necessity, a tide of flesh and faith, wielded like a weapon forged in desperation. The history of the Guard was not written in triumphs, but in statistics, casualty numbers and supply logs, planets saved at the cost of entire populations. And yet, through that endless attrition, the Imperium endured. For every world lost, 10 more stood defiant. For every regiment consumed, another 1,000 strong was raised from some forgotten hive, some frozen tundra, some irradiated wasteland where faith was the only thing that grew. On the burning plains below, a column of Lehman Russ battle tanks advanced through the ruins of a city that had once been home to millions. The ground shook beneath their treads. Dust rose in choking waves, catching the light of burning spires as if the world itself bled fire. Above, the faint shapes of marauder bombers passed overhead, their engines echoing like the growl of ancient gods. Through the cracked lenses of their helmets, guardsmen saw the remnants of civilization crumble around them. Monuments dedicated to saints and martyrs toppled into the streets. Voxcasters barked orders through the static, their voices drowned by artillery thunder. Somewhere beyond the smoke, the enemy moved. Shadows upon shadows, unseen but ever approaching. And yet, the line did not falter. In the heart of that chaos stood the officers, men who had learned to command through endurance rather than inspiration. They read the battlefield not as a canvas of glory, but as a ledger of expenditure, ammunition, bodies, time. Each soldier lost was noted, each advance measured not in meters gained, but in how long it could be held before the next push. Faith was the glue that held it all together. In the face of horrors beyond reason, demons, Xenos, the unending corruption of chaos, it was faith that kept a guardsman's hand steady on his rifle. Faith that whispered through the dust and the screams that his life was not meaningless so long as it was given in service. On this world, as on countless others, the Imperial Guard had come not to conquer, but to preserve what little remained of mankind's dominion. Every shot fired, every tank shell launched, was a prayer of defiance against the encroaching dark. For the Guard knew one truth above all others: humanity's strength was not in its heroes, but in its multitude. And as the day died beneath a blood-red sky, and the last light of the sun vanished behind curtains of smoke, the line of soldiers stood unbroken. Across Vox channels, orders crackled, batteries adjusted their range, engines rumbled in the distance. Tomorrow would bring another assault, another world might fall. But tonight, the hammer of the Emperor stood ready, their resolve harder than the ceramide of any space marine, their courage forged not in power, but in necessity. For in the grim darkness of the far future, there was only war, and it was the mortal man who bore its weight. Dawn did not come to that world, it crawled. A sickly pall of light seeped through the smog, turning the horizon the color of rusted metal. The air trembled with the distant groan of engines, the dull thud of artillery cycling again, and the ceaseless chant of laborers loading munitions into endless lines of trucks. The battlefield slept lightly, if it slept at all. Beneath the choking haze, the Astra Militarum moved with mechanical precision, each motion an echo of centuries of doctrine. In the darkness before battle, there was order. The Guard lived and died by it. Command posts flickered with hollow displays and Auspex readings, their officers hunched over maps of ruinous terrain. Orders were issued, then reissued, each one descending the hierarchy like a waterfall. General to colonel, colonel to captain, captain to sergeant, until it reached the infantryman at the front, who would obey without question and die without ceremony. These soldiers were not nameless to themselves, though the Imperium's records might disagree. They came from worlds so different they could barely comprehend each other's lives. Hive-born workers, with lungs scarred from chemical smog, stood beside farmers from agri-worlds who had never seen a city. There were desert nomads from the tall dunes of Talan, snow-bitten sons of Valhalla, whose laughter froze on their lips, and the unflinching warriors of Cadia, drilled from childhood to stare into the eye of terror. Each regiment bore its own colors, its own prayers, its own ghosts. Yet on the field, they were one machine, flesh and iron bound by duty. The hiss of lasguns charging and the metallic click of flak armor plates closing formed a rhythm of purpose. Vox units whispered code phrases through static, punctuated by the growl of engines awakening to life. Chimeras belched black smoke as their treads bit into the mud, while artillery pieces were hauled into place by teams of sweating troopers. The entire war machine moved as if the world itself were being wound up for slaughter. There was no glamour in their work. Their uniforms were functional, their armor chipped and dented, their weapons older than most of them. The Imperium was vast, but its resources were strained beyond comprehension. A guardsman could fight with a lasgun, once issued to his grandfather, refurbished and sanctified 100 times over. Tanks were patched together from the remains of older wars, their hulls carrying the scars of a dozen campaigns. Everything that could be reused was. Everything that could not was left to rot beneath the mud. And still, the Guard endured. Where the Astartes fought for glory and the Inquisition for purity, the men and women of the Astra Militarum fought because no one else would. Their weapons were not relics of divine craftsmanship, but tools, crude, dependable, and utterly merciless. The Lasgun did not roar like a bolt weapon or shriek like a plasma coil. It snapped with the dry precision of an executioner's whip, each beam cutting through flesh and armor with equal indifference. It was not a weapon of heroes, but of survivors. Across the forward trench lines, priests of the ecclesiarchy moved among the soldiers, their voices rising in liturgical cadence. Each verse of their prayers was a commandment of endurance. To fear not the alien, the mutant, the heretic. To find strength not in hope, but in service. The soldiers listened, not because they believed every word, but because belief itself was a weapon. In the face of the incomprehensible, faith gave shape to the void. At the edge of the camp, a line of basilisks thundered in unison. Their massive cannons recoiled, spitting fire into the pale dawn. Shells screamed into the distance, each one carrying the Emperor's judgment upon unseen foes. The ground shuddered beneath the shockwave, shaking loose ash from the burnt remains of hab blocks. The guardsmen barely noticed. The rhythm of artillery was as constant as their heartbeat. Further back, tech priests of the Mechanicus tended to the engines of war. Wrapped in robes of crimson, their voices were a chorus of binary canticles. Servitors moved at their command, implant limbs sparking as they lifted ammunition or replaced shattered plating. To these priests, machines were sacred vessels of divine purpose, and the soldiers mere flesh to serve them. Between the two, faith of man and machine, stood the Guard, the imperfect bridge that kept the Imperium's heart beating. Through the haze, an officer surveyed the lines. His greatcoat was dark with dust, his face etched with the exhaustion of 100 campaigns. Around him, junior officers relayed commands. Vox operators recorded coordinates, and banners marked the regimental colors fluttered weakly in the wind. He watched the horizon, the same horizon every commander before him had watched, and knew that soon it would ignite again. But this was the way of things. Every regiment, every guardsman, understood that their existence was not to win wars, but to wage them endlessly. Victory was a word used by those who did not count the dead. For the Guard, there was only survival, and even that was temporary. Their strength was not in armor or firepower, but in their numbers and their will. When one fell, another took his place. When a regiment was wiped from the stars, another was raised to fill its silence. As the day lengthened, the heat of bombardment returned. The horizon flared with explosions as the enemy began its first probing assaults. Sirens wailed across the lines. Engines roared to life, and the entire front shifted from stillness to motion, the sounds swelling into a storm of synchronized fury. The hammer of the Emperor was awakening once more, its blows measured not in precision, but in persistence. The line of tanks began to roll forward, flanked by squads of infantry advancing through the churned mud. Overhead, the silhouettes of Valkyries streaked across the sky, their turbines screaming. The earth trembled beneath the synchronized advance of thousands. Each soldier was a drop in an ocean, a voice in the choir of humanity's defiance. The Guard was not beautiful, it was not noble, but it was eternal. And as the first shells of the new battle arced into the air, painting trails of fire against the ash-grey sky, the hammer fell once more, slow, steady, unrelenting. For the Emperor did not need heroes, he needed endurance. Across the void, humanity moved like a tide of locusts, armies beyond counting, legions born from every corner of the Imperium, flowed across the stars in endless procession. Convoys of troop transports, bulk freighters, and warships filled the black between worlds, their engines burning trails of light through the darkness. To an observer, it was not an invasion, but a migration. an entire species in motion, driven by a single, unyielding purpose: to hold back extinction for one more day. From orbit, a war zone looked alive. Fleets shifted in formation, like great schools of iron leviathans. Dropships detached from carriers in synchronized bursts, descending through atmosphere like falling stars. Escort frigates prowled the periphery, their cannons flashing against enemy interceptors that dared to break formation. Even the silence of space could not hide the violence below. Every flicker of light, every burst of plasma or macro shell detonation told a story of sacrifice and survival. Each world that joined the Imperial Crusades paid its tithe in blood. Some sent regiments raised from hive cities, where children learned to assemble rifles before they could read. Others came from death worlds, where soldiers were tempered in the wild long before they saw a battlefield. Even the distant agri-worlds, where war had been a rumor, contributed men to the cause. There was no place in the Imperium untouched by the need for soldiers. Every planet bled for the whole. The logistics were staggering beyond comprehension. Each regiment required weapons, rations, medical supplies, replacement parts, sacred oils, priests, and ammunition, a torrent of needs that could strip a world bare. Hive manufactorums thundered without pause, their furnaces burning day and night to feed the machine of war. Forge worlds forged the bones of the Imperium, Lehman Russ tanks, chimeras, baneblades, basilisks, each one stamped with the sigil of the Omnissiah, anointed in sacred oils, and shipped by the millions. And still, it was never enough. In the void above one war-torn world, a mass convoy gathered. Ships drifted in careful formation, their hulls pocked with scars from 100 past campaigns. Each vessel was a cathedral of metal, its corridors filled with the murmured prayers of men packed shoulder to shoulder. In the holds, the air was heavy with oil, sweat, and incense. Rows of soldiers knelt before their chaplains, their heads bowed as the litany of departure echoed through the Vox. The sound of it was vast, an ocean of voices speaking as one, a single word repeated over and over, like the beating of a drum: service. There was no choice in their devotion. Service was the only currency left to humanity. For every regiment that landed on a battlefield, another was already being raised to replace it. The machine never stopped. The Emperor's war was eternal, and those who fought in it were merely gears in its engine. The dropships descended in waves, the glow of their re-entry setting the night sky alight. Some broke apart under enemy fire before they reached the surface, scattering burning fragments across the atmosphere. Others landed amid ruin, disgorging squads of troopers into craters, ruins, and trenches. The moment their boots met the ground, they ceased to be individuals. They became part of something greater, something that did not end with their deaths. On the surface below, the world was a graveyard of machines. Titans lay broken, their once majestic frames reduced to twisted silhouettes. The carcasses of downed aircraft smoldered amid the ruins of manufactorums. Amid this devastation, the Guard assembled in perfect discipline, forming lines that stretched beyond the horizon. To watch them was to witness the sheer absurdity of human endurance. Billions of lives moving with one heartbeat. Artillery units dug in behind the front. Voxcasters relayed coordinates. Field engineers marked out landing zones with flares of green light. Every movement was rehearsed, every order a repetition of 1,000 battles fought before. It was a ritual, ancient and brutal, performed on every world where mankind made its stand. Through the haze of dust and smoke, banners rose above the ranks. The colors of 1,000 regiments rippled in the wind: greens of Cadian, grays of Krieg, reds of Armageddon, blues of Mordian, whites of Valhalla. Each banner bore scars of previous wars, tears stitched together, scorch marks from plasma fire, dried blood that no sanctified cloth could remove. Yet they flew proudly, for as long as one guardsman stood to hold them. The sight of it stirred something in those who watched. Officers on command balconies, commissars standing with hands clasped behind their backs, even tech priests with faces half machine, all felt it. A grim awe at the magnitude of humanity's will. The Astra Militarum was not beautiful, but it was sublime in its enormity. Across Vox networks, the signal came. It was not a roar, not a cry of triumph, but a steady tone, the sound of inevitability. The Guard began its advance. The ground trembled under the synchronized step of a million boots. Tanks moved forward in perfect unison, their engines belching black clouds that merged with the battlefield's dust. The noise was deafening, the air vibrating with the thunder of motion. The line spread for kilometers in every direction, an iron wave moving toward the enemy. There was no strategy grand enough to encompass such scale. It was a simple truth of war, overwhelm through persistence. The enemy might be faster, stronger, more cunning, but it would drown beneath the weight of humanity's unending resolve. Each soldier knew it. Each one marched knowing that they were a fraction of a number, so vast it could not be understood. Their deaths would not be noticed individually, but together they would move mountains. Together they would remake worlds. And so, under the shadow of burning skies, the Guard marched, billion strong, endless, faceless, eternal. The earth split beneath their tread, the horizon trembled, and the universe itself seemed to pause, as if acknowledging the passage of the Imperium's living tide. For when the Astra Militarum moved, it was not merely an army. It was humanity itself, armed and unyielding, marching toward its destiny. Every regiment of the Astra Militarum was born of a world, and every world shaped its sons and daughters in its own image. There were no uniformed soldiers in the Emperor's armies, only a tapestry of survival, each thread drawn from a different corner of the Imperium. To understand the Guard was to understand the diversity of humanity itself, its pride, its scars, its endless ability to adapt to horror. On the ash wastes of Krieg, the air itself was poison. The sky was a constant bruise of grey and red, heavy with the residue of a civil war that had turned the planet's surface into a graveyard of steel. Beneath the radiation storms, men and women in rebreathers moved through the ruins, their every breath a prayer of contrition. The Death Korps had been born from repentance, a people who had turned their guilt into doctrine. They fought not for victory, but for absolution. On the battlefield, their ranks moved like specters, silent beneath their gas masks, advancing through fire and shrapnel without hesitation. They did not fear death, they sought it. For each fallen Kriegsman was one step closer to redemption for a world damned by its own rebellion. Far from Krieg's silent ruins, the jungles of Katashin pulsed with violent life. The air there was thick with spores and venom, the soil alive with creatures that could kill with a touch. On that death world, survival was not a gift. It was a challenge renewed each dawn. The soldiers of Katashin were born of that constant trial. Their skin was hardened by toxins, their reflexes sharpened by a lifetime of ambushes. They needed no drills, no sermons, no speeches. The jungle itself had trained them for war. When unleashed upon alien worlds, they fought with feral precision, an unrefined, savage force that turned even the most disciplined enemies into prey. Then there were the Cadians, once the bulwark against the eye of terror, now a legend carried on by those who survived its fall. For 10,000 years, They had stood as the Imperium's shield, their entire world devoted to the art of defense. Every child was a soldier before they reached adulthood. Every street, a training ground. Every sunrise, a reminder of what lay across the warp's veil. Even after Cadia was shattered by the forces of chaos, its survivors continued to fight under broken banners, their discipline unbroken. To be Cadian was no longer a nationality, it was a creed. Beyond them lay the steel cities of Armageddon, where industry and warfare were one. There the air was thick with ash and iron, and the people learned to live beneath a constant sky of fire. They fought amid furnaces and factories, wielding lasguns in one hand and wrenches in the other. Their armour bore the scars of both machine and beast, their faces streaked with oil and soot. The steel legions of Armageddon marched in ranks as precise as their assembly lines, their lungs filled with smoke, their faith with iron. The contrast was endless. The glittering regiments of Mordian fought in spotless uniforms, their parade ground discipline undiminished even amid the carnage of war. They believed that order itself was a weapon, that a straight line of soldiers could withstand any chaos. The Valhallans, born on frozen wastes where the air cut like glass, fought with the stoic endurance of ice itself, their laughter carrying across trenches even as they froze to death. The Talons, desert fighters who had turned survival in endless dunes into a sacred art, struck like mirages, vanishing into sandstorms before the enemy could retaliate. And then there were the Hive-born, the countless souls drawn from the cities that covered entire worlds. They lived their entire lives in metal canyons where light was a memory, their air thick with pollutants, their water filtered through decay. To them, war was not a foreign horror, but a familiar rhythm. The Guard offered something the Hive could not: direction. Out there, beyond the blackened spires, they found purpose in battle. Some sought escape, others redemption. Most simply obeyed. Together, these regiments formed the living body of the Astra Militarum, a patchwork of worlds and wills, stitched together by command, fear, and faith. On any given battlefield, soldiers who could not speak the same language would fight side by side, understanding each other not through words, but through the rhythm of last fire and the thunder of artillery. There was beauty in that unity, though few would call it so. It was the beauty of endurance, of a flame that refused to die no matter how many times it was smothered. The Guard did not fight because they expected to win. They fought because someone had to. And that, more than any weapon, was their strength. In the midst of battle, their banners flew together, different colors, different symbols, yet all under the same Aquila. To the enemy, it was a storm of confusion. Disciplined formations from Cadia, advancing beside the near-feral berserkers of Kadashan, Krieg artillery supporting the light-footed scouts of Talon, Mordians maintaining their ranks even as the earth split beneath them. But to those who fought within that storm, it was harmony. Each regiment a different note, each sacrifice part of a greater symphony, the eternal war song of mankind. As dusk fell over another shattered world, the regiments of the Guard gathered once more to prepare for the next offensive. In the flicker of campfires and the dim light of lumen strips, soldiers from a dozen planets sat shoulder to shoulder, cleaning their weapons, sharing what little rations they had, staring into the smoke as if it held the memory of home. Their accents differed, their gods differed, even their ideas of victory differed, but all were united by the same truth. There was no end to their war. Above them, the sky burned with orbital fire, a constant reminder that tomorrow's dawn would come on wings of flame. The hammer of the Emperor had many faces, but only one soul, unbreakable, unending, forged in pain and discipline. And when the call to arms came again, as it always did, their differences would vanish, swallowed by the roar of battle. For no matter where they came from, no matter what they once were, every guardsman knew their purpose. They were humanity's wall against the abyss, the line that would never retreat, and they would hold, always. The storm began at dawn. There was no sunrise, only the pale shimmer of light filtered through dust clouds and smoke. The horizon was nothing but ruin, a scar of trenches, shattered fortifications, and the skeletal remains of hab blocks crushed beneath artillery fire. The ground was thick with the bodies of the fallen, buried halfway in the red mud that had once been soil. The air tasted of metal and ozone, carrying the faint tang of blood and promethium. This was no longer a world, it was a wound. The regiments of the Astra Militarum had been dug in for weeks, their lines stretching across what had once been a fertile plain. Now, it was a wasteland of craters and wreckage, a labyrinth of sandbags and wire, where soldiers lived like rats, sleeping in the earth, waking to the sound of bombardment and counting the hours by the rhythm of death. When the first shells came that morning, the world seemed to stop. The sound was not just loud, it was colossal, a thunder that shook the marrow. The earth convulsed beneath the blast waves. Men were thrown from their positions, their ears ringing, their eyes blinded by the flash. Within moments, the second barrage followed, then the third, until the very ground felt alive, breathing fire and shrapnel. The enemy had begun their assault. The guardsmen rose to their stations with mechanical precision, every motion drilled into instinct. Vox operators screamed coordinates over the static as sergeants barked orders drowned by the roar of falling shells. Lasgun teams swung their weapons into position, their lenses glinting through the haze. Mortar crews worked in frantic rhythm, reloading, firing, adjusting, their faces blackened by soot. Then came the roar from across the field, the sound of engines, the metallic shriek of Xeno armor tearing across the horizon. The enemy revealed itself at last, a tide of alien war machines cresting the ridge in a storm of dust. Shadows moved between them, tall insectoid shapes that skittered with unnatural speed. Beyond them, the silhouettes of walkers, armored beasts, and twisted constructs moved as one. The order to fire came through every channel at once, and the night turned to day. The guard's front line erupted in fire. Lasgun spat beams of red light that carved through enemy armor. Basilisks thundered from the rear, each shot a rolling quake that sent fountains of dirt and metal skyward. Heavy bolters chattered in a steady rhythm, their tracer rounds stitching lines of fire across the battlefield. The air was filled with the scream of shells, the shriek of ricochets, and the howling wind that carried the dust of pulverized men. Through the chaos, commissars walked the lines, their greatcoats whipping in the wind. They did not shout orders. They didn't need to. Their presence was command enough. Every guardsman who met their gaze remembered what failure meant. Behind the front, priests raised their voices in prayer, their chants carried by the vox across the field, merging with the gunfire into something vast and terrible. For hours, the slaughter raged. The enemy surged forward in waves, crashing against the human defenses like a living storm. Each assault was repelled, but each left the trenches shallower, the lines thinner. The earth ran slick with oil and blood. Men fought in hand-to-hand combat amid the wreckage, bayonets meeting alien claws, flesh against chitin, breath against poison. There was no clean kill, no honorable duel, only survival in the filth and ruin. A squad of Catachans held the left flank, their bodies painted with grime, their movements swift and brutal. They fought, not with precision, but with instinct, using the terrain as weapon and trap. To their right, a platoon of Krieg grenadiers advanced through no man's land with suicidal resolve, their lasguns firing in perfect rhythm even as they fell one by one. Above them, Valkyries screamed overhead, their rotors cutting through smoke as they unleashed payloads of missiles into the advancing horde. The world was deafened by the sound of war. Basilisk fire mixed with the shrill banshee wail of incoming shells. The very air burned. Men screamed without realizing it, their voices swallowed by the greater noise. Each heartbeat felt like an eternity. Each breath was a struggle against the choking dust. And still, the line held. Hour after hour, the guards stood their ground, their discipline turning the chaos into a machine of slaughter. For every soldier who fell, another stepped forward to take his place. Orders came through the Vox in broken fragments, coordinates, names, death tallies. The living recorded the dead even as they joined them. By dusk, the field was unrecognizable. The enemy had withdrawn, their advance broken upon the human wall. The landscape was a mosaic of wreckage, smoking tank husks, shattered weapons, and the remains of soldiers who had become part of the earth they defended. The trenches were filled with water-stained crimson, the smell of ozone replaced by the stench of burnt flesh. Medici teams moved among the fallen, their movements slow and deliberate. They did not speak. There was nothing left to say. They worked by rote, bandaging wounds that would never heal, closing eyes that would never open again. Chaplains whispered benedictions over corpses, marking foreheads with ash. Every word they spoke was drowned by the distant thunder of artillery still firing beyond the horizon, proof that the war had not ended, only shifted. As the smoke cleared, the surviving guardsmen stood silent in their trenches, watching the horizon burn. The ground was slick beneath their boots, the air thick with ash. None spoke of victory. There was no triumph here, only the knowledge that they had not broken. Somewhere beyond the fires, a lone Vox signal whispered through the static, the voice thin and mechanical. Prepare for counterattack. The message repeated over and over until it became a rhythm. The soldiers of the Astra Militarum did not rest. They reloaded, they repaired, they buried their dead. Then they looked again to the horizon, where the storm was already building anew. For in the Imperium of man, there were no ends, only pauses between battles, and the dust would drink deep again. Night fell like a shroud of iron. The fires of battle burned dim beneath the smoke, flickering like dying stars over a field of ruin. The guard did not sleep. They waited. The trenches that had been filled with chaos hours earlier now simmered with a cold, anticipatory silence. Every soldier knew the rhythm of war: attack, hold, counterattack. The first blow had been survived. The next would be their own. Somewhere beyond the blackened horizon, the enemy regrouped. Scattered Vox intercepts picked up the static of alien frequencies, the inhuman cadence of their communications. Auspex readings flickered across command displays, revealing movement in the haze, thousands of signatures converging. The foe was preparing to strike again. But the Astra Militarum had already begun to move. The order came in whispers, spreading through the chain of command like the first breath before a scream. Tank engines rumbled to life. Artillery crews made the sign of the Aquila and began their work, adjusting range and trajectory with ritual precision. Vox officers transmitted encoded signals to the armored divisions waiting in the rear. Then came the sound. A low, rising thunder, mechanical, deliberate, growing louder with every heartbeat. The steel regiments were awakening. Rows of Lehman Russ tanks churned through the mud, their treads biting deep, their hulls gleaming dully beneath the pallid light. Chimeras rolled forward beside them, their turrets swiveling in readiness, while the colossal forms of baneblades lumbered into position, each one a fortress of steel and fire. Their engines roared like beasts hungry for blood. From above, the night split open with the descent of Valkyries. Their engines screamed as they cut through the clouds, their floodlights sweeping over the field in beams of harsh white. The glare illuminated the trenches, the banners, the faces of soldiers waiting in the dark, faces streaked with soot, eyes hollow with exhaustion, yet fixed on the same point, the horizon. When the first order came, it was almost lost beneath the sound of the engines, but every guardsman heard it, carried through vox and instinct alike. Fire. The night was obliterated. From the rear lines, basilisks unleashed their wrath. The sky turned orange as hundreds of shells arced upward, glowing like falling suns before disappearing into the clouds. Moments later, the ground beyond the horizon erupted in a chain of explosions that tore valleys into the earth. The shock waves swept back across the battlefield, rattling helmets and shaking the very air. Hydras tracked the skies, their autocannons spitting tracer rounds into the darkness. Manticores followed, launching volleys of missiles that screamed upward before plunging into unseen targets. The battlefield became a living storm of sound, a chorus of thunder, steel, and fury that no mortal language could describe. The enemy returned fire. Beams of unearthly light lanced across the plains, slicing through air and armor alike. Tanks vanished in blossoms of fire, their wrecks tumbling into the mud. Soldiers ducked behind barriers as the night dissolved into chaos once more. Vox channels filled with overlapping voices, commands, prayers, death cries, all blending into static. Through the inferno, the armored divisions pressed forward. Lehman Russ squadrons advanced in formation, guns blazing, the ground trembling beneath their weight. The crews inside moved with the precision of men long resigned to fate, one loading, one firing, one praying. The smell of oil and ozone filled the cramped interiors, mingling with the stench of sweat and fear. Outside, infantry followed close behind. Floodlights cut through the haze as squads advanced through the craters left by the bombardment. The air was thick with drifting ash, each step a struggle through mud and ruin. Flamer teams moved in pairs, cleansing the shadows with burning jets of promethium. The light cast their silhouettes as wavering ghosts upon the smoke. For a brief moment, the battlefield seemed to exist outside of time. The clash of flesh and machine, light and shadow, life and death, each motion feeding into the next like gears in an endless engine. A baneblade rolled into the center of the field, its main cannon rotating toward the enemy line. The ground vibrated as it fired, the explosion a single thunderous note that silenced everything else. The shell struck with catastrophic force, vaporizing a swath of alien constructs and leaving only molten ruin in its wake. Around it, the guard surged forward, seizing the momentum like a tide breaking free of restraint. But war in the 41st millennium was never a contest of strength alone. It was persistence, the grinding endurance of wills. For every enemy formation shattered, another emerged from the smoke. For every victory gained, another flank faltered. The guard advanced, but their line was jagged, uneven, bleeding with every step. The commissars moved among them, their presence like shadows cutting through the firelight. Their voices, calm and absolute, reached even amid the thunder of battle. Where men faltered, they restored resolve, not through words, but through action. Discipline was life, hesitation was treason. The sight of a bolt pistol raised was enough to steady the trembling hands of thousands. By dawn, the field was a graveyard once again. The bombardment had ceased, replaced by the steady crack of last fire and the shriek of dying engines. Smoke drifted low over the ground, heavy as fog. The enemy had been pushed back, though not broken. Their dead littered the plains in grotesque heaps, mingling with those of the Guard. Medici teams worked without rest, their movements methodical amid the wreckage. Servitors collected the fallen, stacking bodies with mechanical indifference. Tech priests anointed the ruined tanks, whispering binary prayers over their cooling engines. And through it all, the Guard stood. Those few who remained upright, their armour scorched, their weapons near empty, their faces carved from exhaustion. They did not cheer, they did not speak, they simply waited for the next order. The sky above them glowed with fire, and in the distance the horizon began to tremble once more. The next wave was coming. The Emperor's hammer did not rest. It only fell, again and again, until nothing remained but dust and silence. And somewhere, beneath that endless noise, the heart of humanity continued to beat, steady, stubborn, and unbroken. The air still trembled with the echoes of war when the Commissar walked the line. Dawn bled pale light across the battlefield, revealing the ruin that had once been a plain. Craters yawned like open wounds, the ground slick with mud and blood. Smoke drifted low, curling around the dead who lay as silent witnesses to humanity's stubborn defiance. The sky above was the color of old iron, heavy with the weight of another coming storm. The guardsmen stood in ragged ranks, their armor blackened, their faces ghostly beneath layers of ash. They did not look at the Commissar as he passed. No one ever did. His presence was a shadow that demanded obedience, a reminder carved into every soldier's soul that there was something far more terrible than the enemy, the failure of duty. His coat swept behind him like a dark banner, its edges stiff with dust and dried blood. A bolt pistol hung at his side, polished and immaculate despite the grime that clung to everything else. His eyes were cold, unflinching, the color of winter stone. Each step he took seemed to weigh upon the air itself. He did not speak. He did not need to. The silence that followed him was command enough. The soldiers knew what his inspection meant. There had been rumors in the night, whispers that one of the platoons had faltered during the advance, that a squad had refused an order when the enemy fire grew too heavy. In the Guard, hesitation was heresy. Cowardice was contagion. It could not be allowed to spread. At last, he stopped. Before him knelt a single guardsman, stripped of his helmet, his uniform torn and stained. His eyes were downcast, his hands trembling as he clutched them behind his back. Around him stood his comrades, faces blank, expressions unreadable. They had seen this before. They would see it again. The Commissar drew his weapon slowly, almost reverently. The act was ritual, not punishment. The pistol gleamed faintly in the morning light. The silence that followed was heavier than any bombardment. Then a single shot cracked through the stillness. The guardsman fell without a sound. The Commissar reholstered his weapon and turned to the others. No words were needed. The lesson had been delivered, carved into the memory of every man who watched. In the Imperium, survival was not a right. It was something earned through obedience and faith alone. He continued his walk down the line, his boots sinking into the soft mud. The guardsmen straightened as he passed, their fear burning away hesitation. Fear was not cruelty, it was fuel. It kept them standing when exhaustion would have dragged them into the mud beside their dead. Beyond the trenches, the sounds of engines carried through the haze. The armor divisions were reforming, the priests chanting litanies to bless the steel beasts before they rolled once more into war. The commissar's gaze followed the movement, his mind a weapon honed sharper than any blade. He saw not soldiers, not men, but cogs in a machine that could not be allowed to falter. He paused by a makeshift chapel, little more than a crater, lined with scrap metal and lit by flickering candles. A mini-storm priest stood within, his voice hoarse from hours of prayer. He raised a relic high, an aquila wrought from scavenged brass and splintered bone, and his words carried through the smoke. They spoke of duty, of sacrifice, of how the Emperor watched them still, even here, on a nameless world no cartographer would ever mark. The guardsmen listened in silence, their eyes reflecting the flames. Each word was a blade that cut through despair, each prayer a chain binding them to purpose. The commissar watched them for a long time. He understood faith, not as comfort, but as control. It was the one thing stronger than fear. The Emperor was both shield and sword, and the belief in his will kept the guard from collapsing under the weight of their endless wars. A sudden explosion in the distance broke the stillness, a dull roar that rolled across the field. The commissar turned, his expression unchanging. Scouts had reported movement beyond the eastern ridge, enemy remnants regrouping, testing the perimeter. The reprieve was ending sooner than expected. He gave the order to prepare for redeployment. The soldiers moved as one, wordless and automatic. Weapons were reloaded, packs secured, armor plates tightened. The trenches emptied with grim efficiency. The wounded who could still stand were sent to the lines. Those who could not were left behind with whispered prayers and a shared understanding that mercy was a luxury no longer afforded. As the guard began to march, the commissar walked among them, his presence steady and cold. To the weary, he was a constant reminder of discipline. To the defiant, he was death in human form. Yet, beneath that iron exterior, he carried a weight no lesser than theirs. The burden of knowing that in this war, there were no heroes, only survivors. The column advanced through the smoke, their silhouettes swallowed by the shifting dawn. Behind them, the fires still burned, the dead still lay, and the wind carried the faint echo of that single gunshot, the sound of order maintained through sacrifice. In the darkness ahead, thunder rolled again. The storm was returning. The commissar adjusted his coat, raised his head toward the burning horizon, and marched on. For the Emperor demanded no less than everything, and the guard, as ever, obeyed. The battlefield slept in uneasy silence, but within the depths of the camp, something vast was awakening. Rows of tanks stood motionless in the half-light of dawn, their hulls caked in mud, their armor scarred and scorched from endless conflict. They rested in neat formation, silent titans of steel and ceramite, Leman Russ, Chimera, Basilisk, Baneblade. Each bore the marks of battle like the scars of a veteran soldier, patches of hastily welded plate, and the black streaks of near-fatal strikes. To mortal eyes, they were machines, but to the faithful of Mars, they were more than that. They were the Emperor's servants in steel. The tech priests moved among them like red-clad phantoms, their robes whispering through the dust, their mechanical limbs clicking softly with purpose. Their movements were ritual, every gesture encoded in sacred logic. Incense burned in censers suspended from servo arms, the air thick with the metallic scent of machine oil and the faint tang of ozone. Binary hymns echoed across the camp, a language both alien and divine, a chorus of prayer to awaken the spirits that slumbered within the machines. A Magos Mechanicus stood before a Baneblade, his body a fusion of flesh and circuitry. His eyes glowed with the pale light of augmetic vision as he extended a mechadendrite tipped with a sacred stylus. inscribing glowing runes along the tank's frontal plate. Sparks danced with each stroke. Every symbol was a benediction, every spark a blessing. He murmured in static-filtered tones, his voice both human and machine, invoking the name of the Omnissiah. To outsiders, it might have seemed madness, priests speaking to machines as though they were gods. But to the Adeptus Mechanicus, it was faith made manifest. Every engine had a soul, a machine spirit, and only through veneration could it be coaxed to wakefulness. The first engines began to stir. With a low, grinding rumble, the Leman Russ nearest the front of the line came alive. Exhaust vents hissed clouds of steam into the cold air. Indicator lights flared across the console arrays like eyes snapping open after a long sleep. The machine spirit within the tank stirred from dormancy, its digital growl resonating through the metal. The crew, 3 men and a gunner, stood at attention beside it, helmets held to their chests, their faces solemn beneath the smoke. They did not dare touch the controls until the rites were completed. Their fate was bound to this machine. Their lives would be its pulse. One by one, the engines of the Astra Militarum came alive. The air shook with the growing thunder of treads grinding against the hardened earth. The tech priest's chants rose in pitch, a crescendo of binary praise that echoed through the valleys like the call of ancient, forgotten gods. A squadron of basilisks opened their breech chambers with mechanical clanks, the metallic echo ringing like the tolling of bells. Artillery shells, massive, gleaming casings marked with wax-sealed prayers, were loaded by teams of laboring servitors. Each shell was a sermon in metal, its flight a hymn of annihilation. Amidst the ritual, the commissar stood watching. He did not speak the language of the Mechanicus, yet he understood the meaning. This was faith, not unlike his own, unyielding, absolute, and born from necessity. While the priests prayed to the Omnissiah, he prayed to the Emperor. Both gods demanded devotion, both required sacrifice, and both demanded war. The Magos turned his gaze upon him briefly, his bionic optics whirring as they focused. There was no exchange of words, only an acknowledgement between 2 different forms of faith, one of steel, one of flesh. Both served the same cause, the continuation of mankind's dominion in a galaxy that sought to erase it. Above them, the Valkyries began to rise. Their engines roared as they ascended into the black clouds, carrying with them squads of stormtroopers and airborne infantry. The roar of their turbines joined the deep bass of the tanks, a symphony of metal heralding the next campaign. The camp transformed into a living forge. Sparks flew as tech priests made last-minute repairs. Gears turned, hydraulics hissed, and servo arms tightened bolts with precision that bordered on reverence. Even the guardsmen nearby slowed their movements, their eyes drawn to the spectacle. There was power in this, cold, industrial, divine power, and they could feel it in their bones. When the final prayer was complete, the Magos raised a single bionic hand. A pulse of binary code rippled through the Vox network, a command both sacred and functional. All engines answered. The camp erupted in motion. Columns of tanks rolled forward in perfect synchrony, their lights glowing through the smoke. Troopers marched between them, their boots striking the ground in unison, the sound merging with the mechanical rhythm of the armor columns. Above, the Valkyries banked low, their contrails streaking through the grey. From the trenches, the waiting soldiers looked up as the tide of metal passed. They raised their weapons in salute, voices breaking into hoarse, wordless cries. For them, the sight of the armored regiments in motion was not just reassurance. It was the Emperor's will made visible. The hammer of the Imperium was ready to strike again. The commissar walked alongside the moving columns, the wind tugging at his coat. The air reeked of promethium and incense, but beneath it, he smelled something else: resolve. This was what humanity did best. It endured, it adapted. It made gods of its machines and soldiers of its dead. As the first ranks rolled beyond the perimeter, he glanced back at the camp one final time. The fires of the previous battle still burned in the distance, dim and steady, like votive candles for the fallen. They would not be extinguished until the last guardsman drew his final breath. The Margos' voice crackled through the vox one last time, its tone a distorted hymn. The commissar could not decipher the binary words, but their meaning was clear enough. The engines of the Emperor had awoken, and soon they would sing the only song humanity had ever truly known: the song of war. The storm came with them. When the armored regiments of the Astra Militarum began their advance toward Vortania Ridge, the very sky seemed to recoil. The wind howled across the plains, driving waves of ash that clung to armor plating and stung exposed flesh. What little light filtered through the clouds was weak and pallid, casting the world in hues of gunmetal and rust. Every horizon looked the same, flat, lifeless, and infinite. The ridge itself lay far beyond sight, hidden beneath the thick veil of dust storms that had raged since the planet's first bombardment. To reach it meant crossing what was left of the Ephirian wastes, a scarred expanse littered with the bones of old wars. Cratered tanks half buried in ash marked the landscape like tombstones. Some still bore the insignias of long-forgotten regiments, ghosts of the Imperium's endless crusades. The columns stretched for kilometers. Lehman Russ battle tanks rolled at the forefront, their treads biting through the hardened mud. Chimera transports followed in tight formation, carrying squads of guardsmen sealed behind armored hatches, their world reduced to the rhythmic rattle of engines and the low hum of the vox. Basilisks and manticores lumbered at the rear, their gun barrels tilted skyward, waiting for the order to bring death to the unseen. The march was slow, deliberate. Every meter gained was measured in sweat and patience. To falter was to be swallowed by the storm. The commissar rode at the head of the convoy, standing in the open hatch of a command chimera. The wind tore at his coat, carrying with it the taste of dust and metal. His gaze swept the desolate horizon, his eyes as hard as the landscape itself. He knew the ridge was more than a geographic objective. It was a symbol. Beyond it lay the enemy stronghold, a nest of heresy and defiance that had withstood every assault. Taking it would break the enemy's spine. Failing would break the guard's resolve. The vox crackled intermittently, bursts of static punctuated by clipped reports. Scouts moved ahead on rugged sentinels, their searchlights cutting through the storm like spectral blades. Occasionally, a flare lit the distant gloom, a signal of discovery, sometimes of contact. The ridge was not unguarded. As the day wore on, the first signs of the enemy began to emerge. At first, they were little more than shadows on the periphery, shapes glimpsed between bursts of dust. The Auspex readings grew erratic, distorted by interference. Then came the first attack. It began with a whisper, a flicker on the sensors, a sudden scream of warning through the vox. Then the horizon erupted. Artillery shells rained down from beyond the ridge, streaks of red fire carving through the storm. The first impacts sent gazes of earth and ash skyward, tearing gaping wounds into the advancing column. A chimera vanished in a plume of flame, its wreckage tumbling end over end. The ground shuddered under the bombardment, the air filling with the sound of shrieking metal and the hollow thunder of detonations. Orders spread like wildfire. Basilisks swung their barrels toward the ridge, calculating coordinates through the storm's distortion. Moments later, the Earth answered back. The counter-barrage howled across the plains, each explosion a rolling quake that merged with the next until it was impossible to tell where one ended and another began. The storm itself seemed to come alive, caught in the exchange of fire. Through the smoke and dust, the enemy revealed itself. Silhouettes emerged on the horizon, twisted figures in crude armour, their movements erratic, unnatural. They advanced without formation, without fear, driven by some alien will or profane fervour. Behind them came the larger shapes, war machines scavenged from the ruins of the world, engines of heresy adorned with symbols that burned the eyes to look upon. The Guard met them with unrelenting precision. Lehman Russ cannons thundered in unison, the recoil shaking their massive frames. Each shell tore through ranks of the enemy, sending bodies scattering like debris in the wind. Heavy bolters chattered along the flanks, their rhythm unbroken even as shells exploded around them. Chimera hatches opened to unleash disciplined volleys of lasfire, red streaks cutting through the haze in merciless patterns. Infantry disembarked under the cover of their armour. They moved in tight squads, boots sinking into the churned mud, their movements mechanical and methodical. Vox commands crackled through their helmets, directing fire, marking targets. The storm reduced visibility to meters, but the Guard did not need to see the enemy to destroy them. They fired by instinct, by training, by faith. The Commissar stood at the front, his voice cutting through the chaos, his commands precise and absolute. Around him, men fought and died with the mechanical resolve of those who had long ceased to believe in survival, yet continued to fight all the same. Hours passed, or perhaps it was only minutes. In the storm, time had no meaning. The ridge loomed closer, a black mass rising from the chaos. Its slopes were carved into trenches and bastions of stone, half ruined but still formidable. Through the smoke, the glint of enemy emplacements flickered like stars in a dying sky. The Guard's advance slowed. Every step forward brought new resistance. Mortars screamed from hidden pits. Snipers struck from shattered towers. The dead lay thick behind the tanks, their bodies half buried by the shifting ash. Medicaid teams moved where they could, but the storm consumed the cries of the wounded before they could reach human ears. Still, the Guard did not stop. The ridge was close enough now that the ground beneath them began to rise. The slope was treacherous, the mud slick with oil and blood. Engines strained, treads slipping, yet still the tanks climbed. Infantry followed behind, the wind howling around them, tearing at their banners. At last, through the swirling storm, the first ranks reached the foot of Fortania Ridge. The enemy stronghold loomed above them, black towers clawing at the sky, lights burning within like the eyes of something ancient and malevolent. The Commissar raised his gaze to that distant height. He could feel the weight of history pressing down upon him, the countless wars fought before, the nameless millions who had bled for victories that would be forgotten. And yet, he knew why they fought. Not for glory, not for remembrance, but because the Emperor willed it so. He raised his hand. Through the Vox, a single order rang clear, cutting through static, dust, and death alike. Advance. And so they did. Through ash and thunder, through the ruin of worlds, the soldiers of the Astra Militarum climbed toward the ridge. Behind them, the ground trembled beneath the march of engines, the hymn of war rising once more. The hammer of the Emperor had found its next anvil, and the galaxy would tremble beneath the blow. The ridge was a wound carved into the planet's skin, its slopes blackened by centuries of bombardment and fire. As the guard ascended, the storm broke against the stone like a living thing, its winds shrieking through the shattered battlements, carrying with them the cries of the dying and the scent of Promethium. Vortania Ridge towered over the plains like a fortress built from the bones of the dead. Its walls were jagged, carved from a volcanic rock and reinforced with scavenged metal. Bunkers jutted from its face like rusted teeth, their gun ports glowing faintly as defensive batteries came to life. The enemy had fortified it well. Every slope, every trench, every shattered ruin had been turned into a killing ground. The order to begin the assault came with the first light of dawn. The world erupted. The basilisks fired first, their thunder rolling across the plains in endless waves. The ridge vanished beneath a curtain of explosions, its flanks shattering as earth and stone were thrown high into the air. Entire bunkers collapsed under the barrage, consumed by the fury of the Emperor's artillery. Yet still, the enemy endured. When the guns ceased, the world was silent for the briefest of moments. Then the guard advanced. Infantry surged up the slope in waves, their boots slipping in the slick mud. Lasguns clutched tight against their chests. The air was filled with the staccato crack of lasfire and the deeper roar of heavy bolters. Above them, Valkyries screamed through the clouds, releasing payloads of fire and fragmentation upon the ridge's defenses. Their descent was like the vengeance of angels, swift and merciless. The first trenches were taken in blood. The defenders were waiting, twisted creatures in scavenged armour, their faces obscured by masks of bone and rust. They rose from the smoke like phantoms, their weapons crude but deadly. They fought not for survival, but for ruin, throwing themselves against the advancing guard with reckless abandon. The fighting devolved into chaos. Bayonets met jagged blades. Last fire lit the darkness in pulses of red, and the ground became slick with the blood of both human and heretic alike. Each trench was a tomb, each advance a sacrifice. The guard did not falter. They climbed step by step, leaving behind only the dead and the echoes of their fury. Commissars moved among the ranks, their presence an anchor in the storm. They did not shout, they did not need to. Their very presence carried authority, their calm amid the slaughter, a reminder that duty was eternal and fear was heresy. When soldiers stumbled, they steadied them. When lines wavered, they restored them. And when courage failed, their pistols ensured it never failed twice. At the base of the central bastion, the enemy made their stand. Massive gates of blackened steel barred the way, scarred by centuries of war. From within, heavy stubbers and autocannons poured unending fire into the ranks of the guard. Dozens fell with every heartbeat, yet still they pressed forward. The first Lehman Russ rolled into range, its hull scarred, its treads half buried in mud. The tank's cannon fired, the recoil shaking the ground. The shell struck the gate dead center, tearing a molten scar across its surface. Again and again, the guns roared, each shot a demand for surrender that would never come. The walls began to crack. Melter teams advanced under the cover of the tanks, their weapons glowing with the heat of destruction. The very air shimmered as they unleashed their fury, the gate's metal warping, melting, sagging. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then, with a scream of tortured steel, the gates of Vortania Ridge gave way. The guards surged forward. They poured into the breach like a living tide, last fire flashing in the gloom. Inside the fortress, the corridors were narrow and choked with smoke. Every corner hid another ambush, every stairwell another desperate struggle. The heretics fought like beasts, cornered by their own madness, their chants echoing through the ruins as they died. Grenades tore through the dark, lighting the passageways with brief, blinding bursts. The walls were slick with soot and blood. Vox chatter filled the ears of every guardsman. Orders, coordinates, screams cut short. It was not battle, it was butchery. And still, the guard pressed on. Deeper within the fortress, the enemy command center burned. The defenders' leaders, mutants, zealots, madmen, stood amid the chaos, shrieking praises to gods that no longer listened. A single strike team reached them, storming the chamber under the cover of smoke and fire. The battle there lasted only minutes, though it felt like eternity. When it ended, nothing remained but silence and the faint hum of dying machinery. Outside, the ridge burned. Entire sections collapsed under the weight of artillery fire. The once impregnable fortress was reduced to ruin, its walls torn open, its defenders scattered to the winds. The banners of the Astra Militarum rose where the enemy sigils had once hung, tattered but unbroken. The ridge was theirs. As the sun set behind the smoke, the survivors gathered on the shattered heights. They looked down upon the wasteland below, upon the endless fields of ash, upon the wreckage of tanks, the trenches filled with bodies, the fires that still burned in the distance. The victory had come at a cost beyond measure. But it was victory all the same. The commissar stood at the edge of the ridge, his coat torn, his face streaked with soot. Around him, the wind howled through the ruins, carrying with it the faint, metallic scent of blood and promethium. He did not smile. He did not allow himself the luxury. For he knew the truth that every guardsman learned too soon. One battle's end was merely the beginning of another. Below, the Vox crackled with new orders. Reinforcements were inbound. The campaign was far from over. The ridge was only the first step. The Emperor's hammer had struck true, but now it must strike again. As the night descended, the fires of Vortania Ridge burned like pyres, casting long shadows across the wastes. The dead were silent. The living stood ready, and above them all, beneath the iron sky, the creed of the guard endured. There is only duty. There is only war. When the guns finally fell silent, the world seemed to exhale. The constant thunder that had defined existence for so long faded into echoes that rolled through the valleys and were gone. In its place came a silence so heavy it felt unnatural, oppressive, as though the planet itself was mourning. The smoke still lingered over Vortania Ridge, coiling upward in black plumes that stretched into the blood-colored sky. The air was thick with ash and the metallic tang of spent munitions. The battle was won. The price was immeasurable. Across the scarred slopes, the remnants of the Astra Militarum moved among the dead. The living and the fallen were indistinguishable beneath the same layer of soot. Men staggered like specters through the haze, their eyes hollow, their voices little more than whispers. The ground beneath their boots was soft, slick with blood and oil, the soil so churned it no longer remembered what it had been before war had claimed it. Medica units worked in silence, their white coats stained dark with the labor of mercy. They moved with weary precision, their hands trembling not from fear, but from exhaustion. Every few meters, they knelt beside a fallen soldier, checking for signs of life, marking the dead with crimson ribbons torn from their own bandages. Servitors followed behind them, faceless and methodical, collecting the bodies and stacking them with mechanical care. The ridge itself had become a monument to ruin. The fortress that had once crowned it now lay shattered, its walls broken, its towers collapsed into heaps of twisted metal. Fires burned deep within the ruins, smoldering in the cracks like the last breaths of a dying god. The wind carried the sound of crumbling stone and the faint, hollow clatter of spent casings tumbling across the ground. Within the ruins, the commissar walked alone. His boots crunched softly over the debris as he moved through the remnants of the command chamber, where hours before the enemy's leaders had made their final stand. The stench of death was overpowering. The bodies of the heretics lay strewn about, their forms distorted by mutation and madness. He regarded them with the cold detachment of one who had seen too much to be shocked. They were abominations, proof of what awaited humanity should it ever falter in its faith. On a cracked table nearby, a tattered banner lay half buried beneath the rubble. Its sigil, once bright, was now burned and defiled. The commissar lifted it briefly, examining the faded colors before letting it fall. There was no triumph in victory here, only necessity. Outside, the surviving guardsmen gathered around makeshift fires, their bodies hunched, their eyes fixed on the flames. The light cast their faces in shades of amber and shadow, revealing expressions carved from exhaustion and disbelief. They spoke little. Words had become a luxury long since spent. Some sharpened blades that would see no use for days. Others simply stared into the fire, as though trying to find meaning in its restless motion. The priests of the Ministorum moved among them, their voices carrying over the crackle of flames. They offered prayers for the fallen, reciting verses of faith that had been whispered on 1,000 battlefields before. The words were old, worn smooth by repetition, yet they held power still. For the guard needed faith as much as ammunition. Without it, there would be no next battle. At the edge of the ridge, the basilisks and manticores stood silent, their barrels blackened from overuse. The tech priests moved between them, murmuring to the machine spirits in binary hymns, coaxing the engines to rest. Their red robes fluttered in the wind like tattered banners of devotion. One by one, they extinguished the lights of the engines, and the vast war machines settled into uneasy slumber. In the command post, newly established amid the ruins, officers spoke in hushed tones. Vox units crackled with incoming transmissions, requests for supplies, confirmations of reinforcements, casualty reports that scrolled endlessly across flickering data slates. The scale of loss was beyond comprehension, yet none paused to grieve. Numbers were easier than faces. The commissar entered without ceremony. The officers rose instinctively, but he motioned for them to continue. He did not need their formalities. He needed their resolve. He studied the maps spread across the table, their ink smudged by dust and blood. Beyond Vortania Ridge, more territories waited, valleys and cities, each one a fortress, each one a future grave. The campaign was far from over. He turned away from the maps and stepped to the open parapet, gazing out over the wasteland below. The sun was setting behind the storm, a red disk half consumed by smoke. It painted the battlefield in shades of crimson and gold, turning the dead into silhouettes. For a fleeting moment, the world almost seemed peaceful, but he knew better. In the distance, faint tremors shook the horizon. Artillery in the far east, the dull rhythm of another engagement already unfolding. War did not end. It merely moved on, leaving behind ashes and ghosts. Behind him, a young guardsman approached, his uniform torn, his hands trembling. As he saluted, the commissar studied him briefly. The wide eyes, the dirt-streaked face, the way his voice faltered as he reported that the burial details were complete. A survivor, barely holding his composure. The commissar gave a single nod of acknowledgement. No words of comfort, no false promise, just a nod. It was enough. The soldier hesitated, then returned to his duties, disappearing into the haze. The commissar lingered a moment longer, the wind tugging at his coat. He could still hear the faint echoes of gunfire carried across the plains, the song of war continuing somewhere beyond sight. He looked once more to the horizon, where the storm gathered anew. The ridge was theirs, but the galaxy was vast, and humanity's enemies were without number. There would always be another fortress, another world, another night like this one, and the Guard would march again. As the last light of day died behind the smoke, the commissar whispered a prayer, not for peace, for such a thing no longer existed, but for endurance. For as long as the Emperor watched, man would endure, and as long as man endured, there would be war. The silence that followed was complete. A silence born not of peace, but of exhaustion. The silence before the next command. The dawn came slow and grey, spreading its light across a world that no longer remembered colour. Smoke still rose from the shattered ridge, curling through the wind in thin, spectral tendrils. It carried with it the scent of burning promethium and decay, drifting over the field of the dead where the Guard worked in silence. There was no rest for them, not even in victory. Across the blackened slopes, thousands of guardsmen toiled with shovels and picks, their movements mechanical, their eyes hollow. They dug in silence, turning over the wet soil, thick with ash and blood. The ground gave grudgingly, clinging to what it had claimed, but the soldiers persisted. The dead of the Astra Militarum would not be left to rot where they had fallen. They would be given graves, honoured, marked, and remembered, in the only way the Guard knew how, through duty. The work was endless. Bodies lay in heaps across the battlefield, their uniforms scorched and torn, their insignia barely visible beneath layers of soot. Servitors and medici teams moved among them, sorting the fallen by regiment, stacking the bodies on stretchers, fashioned from broken armour plating. The wounded watched in silence from their stretchers, their eyes fixed on the distant pyres that had already begun to burn. In the centre of the field, the priest of the Ministorum had raised a great iron sigil of the Aquila. Its wings spread wide over the mass graves, catching the pale light of dawn. Around it, the ecclesiarchy conducted their rites, their voices rising and falling in solemn cadence. The air trembled with the low, resonant hum of hymns. Their words were ancient, lines passed down from the first crusades of old terror. Each verse was a dirge, each refrain a promise of salvation through service. The priests moved with ritual precision, anointing the dead with sacred oils, tracing the sign of the Aquila across their foreheads. For the fallen, there was no greater honor than to die in the Emperor's name, and for the living, there was no greater burden than to ensure they were not forgotten. The commissar stood among the ranks, his cap held in his hands, the wind whipping through his dark coat. Around him, the soldiers knelt in uneven lines, heads bowed. No one spoke, no one dared to. The only sound was the rhythmic tolling of a makeshift bell, a scavenged artillery casing suspended from a chain, struck by the blunt end of a rifle. Each ring marked another soul consigned to the Emperor's light. As the pyres were lit, the flames roared to life, consuming the bodies with a fierce, purifying hunger. The smoke rose in vast black columns that reached towards the heavens like pillars of faith and sacrifice. For a moment, it seemed as if the world itself was offering up its dead to the sky. The commissar's gaze drifted over the fires. Faces he recognized flickered within the glow, soldiers who had followed him into the storm and had not returned. Men and women who had stood shoulder to shoulder on the ridge, who had laughed, cursed, prayed, and died in the same breath. The Guard did not weep. It was not their way. but behind their silence, grief burned like a slow flame that never truly went out. Nearby, a young priest knelt beside a row of bodies wrapped in torn banners. His voice trembled as he recited the litanies of passing, his faith raw but unbroken. His hands shook as he drew the sign of the Aquila over each form. He was barely older than the soldiers he buried, yet his eyes held the same ancient weariness. When his strength faltered, another priest joined him, and together they continued the prayer, their voices merging into one. Further down the line, the tech priests conducted their own rites for the fallen machines. Their rituals were colder, more mechanical, but no less sacred. The remains of tanks and transports lay half buried in the mud, their machine spirits extinguished in battle. The priests moved among them, intoning hymns in binary cant, their voices modulated through vox grills. With each prayer, they retrieved fragments of circuitry, relics of blessed steel, fragments to be carried back to the forges of Mars for re-sanctification. One priest stood before a Lehman Russ, half swallowed by the earth. Its hull was shattered, its turret blackened and fused, its treads still smoking. He rested a metal hand upon the scarred armor, murmuring to it softly in a static laced tone, as if comforting a dying friend. When he finally withdrew, he left behind a single candle burning atop the tank's hull, a flame trembling defiantly against the wind. The day stretched on, the sun, a dim circle behind veils of smoke. The work did not cease. Even as night approached once more, the soldiers continued their labor, driven by a sense of duty stronger than fatigue. They dug, carried, buried, and burned until the ground itself became a graveyard of silence. When the last body was consigned to the fire, the priests gathered at the base of the Aquila. The commissar stepped forward, his boots crunching over the ashen soil. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice steady and low, he began the final benediction, a ritual reserved for victories paid in blood. He spoke of sacrifice, of the emperor's will, of the unyielding duty that bound the living to the dead. His words were not poetic, they were carved from truth, blunt and unadorned, yet they carried weight enough to still the wind. The soldiers listened in silence, their faces illuminated by the glow of the pyres. When the final words were spoken, the commissar lowered his head. Around him, thousands of soldiers did the same, each whispering their own prayer into the smoke. The fires burned through the night. Their light flickered across the ridge, painting the ruins in gold and red. The dead were gone, but their presence lingered, woven into the air, the soil, the armor of those who remained. The emperor received their souls, the guard inherited their burden, and when dawn came again, the living would march once more, into another war, another world, another night of fire. For in the Imperium of man, there was no end to sacrifice, only its continuation. The fires of the dead still burned when the dawn came again, their embers painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold. Smoke clung to the air like a shroud, heavy and unyielding. The scent of charred metal and flesh lingered in every breath, a reminder that victory in the Imperium was not measured by triumph, but by survival. The soldiers of the Astra Militarum gathered in the hollow where the ridge had once stood proud. The ground beneath their boots was blackened and uneven, littered with shell casings and fragments of armor. They stood in silence, thousands of them, arrayed in loose formations, their uniforms torn, their armor scarred, their faces marked by soot and exhaustion. At their center, a great makeshift altar had been raised. It was not ornate nor crafted with precision. It was a thing of war, an old chimera wreck, its hull scorched and split, its sides painted with the Aquila in rough, uneven strokes of white ash. Upon its hull stood a single figure, robed in crimson and black, the wind pulling at his vestments, a priest of the ecclesiarchy. His name was Father Halvain. He was tall, his shoulders broad, though age had stooped his back. His face was half hidden beneath a rebreather mask, its lenses glowing faintly in the morning gloom. His hands were bare, scarred from years of carrying relics and flame. In one, he held a worn copy of the Lectitio Divinitatus, its pages stiff with soot and blood. In the other, he held a censer that exhaled trails of incense, thick and sweet, almost masking the stench of war. When he spoke, his voice rolled across the plain, like thunder contained within mortal lungs. He did not shout. He did not need to. His words carried weight enough to silence the restless air itself. He spoke of the Emperor, not as a distant god upon a golden throne, but as the fire that burned within them all. He told them that the Emperor's light was not found in temples or in marble halls, but here, upon the scorched earth, in the hearts of those who bled and burned for his will. He reminded them that the Astra Militarum was not merely an army, but a covenant of flesh and faith, bound by the promise that mankind would never kneel to the alien, the heretic, or the darkness between the stars. The soldiers listened. Not one moved. The priest's voice deepened, gaining momentum, echoing off the broken walls of the ridge. He spoke of the fallen, not as victims, but as martyrs whose deaths had paved the road ahead. Every grave was a scripture, every pyre a sermon. The Guard, he said, were the Emperor's hands, his wrath made manifest, his will given form through last fire and bayonet. And though the galaxy sought to drown humanity in despair, faith would be their armour, duty their shield. He raised his hand toward the east, where the black horizon shimmered with the promise of another storm. There, he said, his tone fierce and unyielding, lies the next battle, the next test, the next chance to prove that mankind still endures. His words rippled through the ranks like the first notes of a hymn. Some soldiers bowed their heads. Others lifted their eyes to the sky, their faces streaked with grime and light. Even the commissars stood in silence, their hands resting on their sidearms, not in authority, but in shared reverence. The wind shifted, carrying with it the smell of incense and smoke. The flames of the pyres flickered, as though stirred by unseen hands. Father Halvain's voice grew softer, yet more powerful still. He spoke of the burden of survival, of the pain of enduring when so many had fallen. He told them that despair was the whisper of the enemy, and that only faith could silence it. The Emperor does not ask that you live without fear, he said. He asks that you march through it. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, slowly, the soldiers began to move. Helmets were raised. Bayonets clicked into place. The banners of the regiments unfurled in the wind, their tattered cloth catching the weak light of dawn. For a heartbeat, it seemed as if the world itself had paused to watch. A murmur began at the front of the formation, low, rhythmic, a prayer. It spread like fire through dry grass, passing from soldier to soldier until it became a thunderous chant that rolled across the battlefield like an oncoming storm. For the Emperor, for the Guard. The ground trembled beneath their voices. The pyres roared higher, their flames casting long shadows that danced across the wreckage. The sound was not of mourning, but of defiance, a roar against the void itself. From the ridge above, the commissar watched in silence. The sermon had rekindled what exhaustion had nearly extinguished. The soldiers were alive again, not merely in body, but in spirit. The faith that had been buried beneath blood and ash now burned anew. He looked toward Father Halvain, who stood motionless upon the altar, head bowed. The priest's shoulders trembled faintly, though whether from fatigue or revelation, none could tell. The commissar turned away, his expression unreadable. The next campaign awaited, and faith alone would not win it, but without it, they would never survive it. As the chanting continued, the engines of the armored columns began to awaken once more. The ground shook beneath the treads of the Leman Russ and the rumble of chimera transports. The sound of machinery joined the voices of men, merging into one unified rhythm, the heartbeat of the Imperium itself. Faith and fire. Flesh and steel. The sermon was over. The war had begun again, and as the first banners rose against the pale morning light, the guard marched onward. Not because they believed they would live, but because they believed they must. For in the Imperium of man, belief was stronger than survival. It was survival. The world trembled beneath the weight of engines. When dawn finally broke over Vortania Ridge, it revealed an army reborn, not in strength, but in conviction. The night's prayers still lingered in the air, heavy as incense, and though the soldiers' bodies were worn and their spirits bruised, the fire of Father Halvain's sermon still burned behind their eyes. The time for mourning had ended. The time for movement had come. Columns of armor rolled across the blackened plains, the ground shaking beneath their treads. The Leman Russ squadrons led the way, iron beasts with battle scars deep as rivers, their hulls painted with the names of the dead. Chimeras followed in close formation, their engines coughing smoke, their transports packed tight with infantry, who clung to their weapons like relics. Basilisks and manticores lumbered in the rear, their massive barrels angled toward the horizon, waiting for the next call to fire. Above it all, the Valkyries soared, their engines screaming as they cut through the smoke-choked skies. They were dark silhouettes against a blood-colored dawn, their contrails slicing through clouds of ash. Beneath them, the soldiers of the Astra Militarum moved as one vast, living machine. Hundreds of thousands of men and women, bound by discipline, faith, and the will of the Emperor. The march began at first light. Each regiment advanced in measured rhythm, boots striking the ground in a cadence that echoed for miles. Vox units crackled with terse commands, their signals cutting through the hum of engines and the clatter of weapons. Banners waved above the ranks, torn and soot-streaked, their edges burned, yet still they flew proudly. The wasteland stretched before them, vast, grey and silent. Once, it might have been fertile ground. Now, it was a graveyard of steel. Burned-out husks of tanks jutted from the soil like monuments to forgotten wars. Skeletons of ruined hab blocks loomed in the distance, their windows gaping like hollow eyes. The wind carried the ghostly whisper of old battles, the echoes of screams that had never stopped. And yet, through this desolation, the guard marched. The commissar rode at the forefront of the column, his coat whipping in the wind, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The map had named their next destination only as Sector 9-Vortania Expanse. To the soldiers, it was simply the next war. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the enemy gathered in force. Somewhere beyond that wasteland, humanity's fragile dominion awaited either salvation or extinction. He watched the men as they marched, some limping, some coughing through masks clogged with ash, some barely holding their rifles steady, yet none faltered. The sermon had burned away hesitation. What remained was purpose, forged in the crucible of suffering. In the ranks behind him, Father Halvain walked among the troops, his robes trailing through the mud. He carried no weapon, no armor, only his censer and his faith. At intervals, He paused beside a soldier, placing a hand upon their shoulder, whispering benedictions that mingled with the rhythm of the march. To those too broken to stand, his presence alone was enough to make them rise. The tech priests of the Mechanicus moved among the armored vehicles, their voices crackling with binary hymns. Their mechadendrites hissed softly as they tended to the sacred machines, anointing their armor with oils and sparks. Every few miles, the convoy would halt, and the priests would offer rites of maintenance to keep the machine spirits appeased. Even the smallest chimera received its blessing, for in the eyes of the Mechanicus, each was a vessel of divine will. By midday, the heat rose from the plains like a living thing. The ash reflected the light of the dying sun, giving the world an unnatural brilliance. The soldiers marched through it without complaint, their armor glinting dully beneath layers of soot. Their water was rationed, their rations already stale, yet the pace never slowed. The Astra Militarum knew no comfort, only duty. Occasionally, the horizon would flicker with movement, the faint shimmer of distant fortifications, the shadow of unseen aircraft, the glint of metal where none should be. The enemy watched from afar, patient and unseen, waiting for the right moment to strike. The commissar could feel it, the tension, the weight of inevitability pressing down on them like a coming storm. But fear had no place here. He raised his vox and issued the command to continue the advance. The march resumed, steady and relentless. The wind picked up, carrying with it the echo of countless footsteps. It was not the sound of a single army. It was the sound of a species refusing extinction. As night fell, the columns came to rest upon a plateau overlooking the dead plains below. Campfires flickered to life in tight clusters, their light glowing through the haze like stars beneath the clouds. From above, the encampment looked almost holy, a constellation of fire amid a sea of ash. The soldiers gathered in small circles, their faces lit by the flames. Some cleaned their rifles, others repaired armor plates with field tools and fragments of scrap. The priests walked among them once more, reciting prayers of endurance and gratitude. For tonight at least, they lived. That was enough. The commissar stood apart, his gaze fixed on the dark horizon. Beyond the plains, lightning flickered within the clouds, an unnatural light that danced and pulsed as though the storm itself were alive. Somewhere out there, the next battle awaited. He turned slightly as Father Halvain approached. The priest's voice was soft beneath the howl of the wind. He spoke of omens seen in the ash, of visions glimpsed through the fire, the promise of victory bought with unimaginable cost. The commissar said nothing. He did not ask for prophecy. Faith was enough. When the priest had gone, he remained alone for a long while, his hand resting upon the hilt of his bolt pistol. The fires behind him flickered. The storm before him stirred. The next war would come soon. It always did. And when it did, the Guard would meet it as they always had, with lasguns raised, banners torn, faith unbroken. For they were the hammer of the Emperor, and the galaxy would remember their tread long after their bones had turned to dust. The night deepened, the wind howled. The march would resume at dawn. By dawn, the sky had become a living wound. Dark clouds rolled over the wastelands like a tide of ink, swallowing the faint light of the rising sun. Lightning tore through the heavens in jagged veins of unnatural color, purple, green, and gold, painting the world in sickly hues. The wind howled with a voice not its own, whispering in broken tongues that made even the most stalwart soldier glance uneasily to the horizon. The storm had come. It did not fall from the heavens like a natural tempest. It grew, rising from the ground itself, fed by the warp-tainted air of Vortania's cursed soil. Dust and ash swirled into towering columns, twisting together into vast cyclones that reached toward the churning clouds above. The air shimmered and warped, as though reality itself strained to hold its shape. The commissar stood before the assembled ranks, his cloak snapping violently in the wind. He could feel the static bite of the storm crawling over his skin, hear the faint hum of the Vox crackling with interference. The storm front stretched for miles in every direction, an encroaching wall of chaos and shadow. Behind him, the Astra Militarum prepared for battle. The armored columns formed up in disciplined lines, tanks rumbling as their engines roared to life. The soldiers moved with precision, born from endless repetition, checking their lasguns, adjusting their respirators, sealing their armor against the rising dust. There was no panic, only grim purpose. Every guardsman knew the storm was not a mere weather front. It was a herald. The enemy was coming. The Vox channels erupted in bursts of static and distorted voices. Through the noise came fragments of reports, sightings of movement in the east, Auspex readings spiking off the charts, whispers of unnatural light moving through the haze. The storm had masked the enemy's advance, hiding their numbers, their weapons, their intent. But there was no need for confirmation. The commissar already knew what approached. The servants of the dark gods had come to reclaim what the guard had taken. A tremor rippled through the ground, subtle at first, then growing until it felt like the earth itself was shuddering beneath the weight of unseen titans. Dust cascaded from the cliffs around the plateau. The soldiers braced themselves, their weapons raised, eyes searching the horizon. And then they appeared. Out of the storm's heart came the shapes of twisted armor and warped steel, an army of heretics, their banners marked with symbols that defied sanity. They moved in silence at first, a tide of black and red figures emerging from the ash. But as they drew closer, the air filled with the sound of drums and chanting, deep, guttural voices that rose above the wind like the growl of some ancient beast. The traitor legions had come. At the sight of them, a ripple passed through the guard lines, not of fear, but of recognition. These were no nameless Xenos. These were men once of the Imperium, their faces hidden behind corrupted armor, their souls long since sold to the abyss. The commissar raised his sword high, its surface glinting in the warped light. The Vox carried his command across the lines. The guard answered with thunder. The first barrage erupted from the basilisks in the rear. The earth split apart beneath the force of their bombardment, geysers of fire and shrapnel tearing into the advancing enemy ranks. The roar of the guns drowned out the chanting, turning the air into a wall of sound and fury. Shell after shell screamed through the storm, each detonation briefly illuminating the battlefield in flashes of hellish brilliance. The enemy responded in kind. From within the storm, counter-barrages struck. Explosions tore through the forward trenches, hurling men and machines alike into the air. Chimeras were shredded in seconds, their armor buckling under the impact. The screams of the dying were carried away by the wind, lost in the endless cacophony. And still, the guard did not yield. Infantry surged forward under the cover of smoke, their bayonets glinting as they took position along the ridgeline. The air was thick with lasfire, hundreds of red beams slicing through the storm, cutting down silhouettes that moved like shadows within the haze. The enemy's response was immediate. Bursts of bolter fire tore through the ranks, each shot exploding with bone-shattering force. The line wavered, but did not break. Commissars moved among the troops, their voices calm, their pistols ready. Any man who faltered was met not with punishment, but with the silent weight of expectation. There was no retreat. There never was. At the center of the formation, Father Halvain stood with his censer raised high, the smoke of his incense mingling with the acrid fumes of gunpowder. He walked among the wounded, his voice a steady hymn, rising above the chaos. He spoke not of victory, but of purpose, reminding each soldier that their death here would not be meaningless. His words were a lifeline in the storm, a thread of light woven through madness. The battle raged for hours without pause. The storm thickened until day and night became meaningless. Visibility dropped to meters at most. Shapes moved in the haze, some human, some not. And then the ground shook again. A deeper tremor, heavier, rhythmic. Something vast was approaching. Through the smoke and lightning, the silhouette emerged, a massive war machine, walking on legs like pillars of molten iron. A corrupted knight, its armor daubed with symbols of ruin, its eyes burning with infernal light. It strode forward, its cannons spitting fire, each blast annihilating entire squads in a single heartbeat. For a moment, the guard faltered. Then, with a grinding roar, a bane blade answered. The ground trembled as the Imperial Super Heavy rolled into position, its machine spirit howling through Vox-saturated static. Its main cannon fired, a sound like the world itself tearing apart. The shell struck the knight square in the chest, engulfing it in a storm of fire. For a heartbeat, the traitor engine staggered. Then it retaliated, its own guns roaring in blasphemous fury. The duel that followed was apocalyptic. Fire met fire, steel met steel. The Baneblade's crew fought with fanatical precision, their voices lost beneath the rumble of their god machine. The Commissar watched as the two titans traded blows across the burning plain, their silhouettes framed by the storm's endless fury. Around them, the battle continued, the guard holding the line inch by inch, refusing to yield even as the world fell apart around them. The storm screamed louder, its winds bending the very light. The air itself seemed to burn. Reality trembled on the edge of collapse. And yet, amid it all, the guard still fought. They fought not for glory, nor for hope, but because they must. Because they were human. And to be human in the Imperium was to defy the impossible. The Commissar lifted his sword once more, the blade catching the flicker of distant fire. Around him, the soldiers rallied, their battle cries swallowed by the storm, but carried still in spirit. The Emperor watched, the galaxy burned, and the guard endured. The storm would not break them. It never could. The storm had ceased to be mere weather. It had become a world unto itself, an endless, churning ocean of dust and lightning that swallowed everything in its path. Within it, the battle had no direction, no order, no horizon. The very concept of up or down, life or death, seemed to blur as the warp-touched tempest howled across the plains of Vortania. Men vanished into the haze and did not return. Vox signals dissolved into static. The earth itself cracked open, vomiting fire and fragments of twisted metal. What had begun as a battlefield had become a crucible, and only the strongest souls, human or otherwise, would see its end. The Commissar's voice rasped over the comnet, calm and sharp as a blade drawn across glass. He had lost sight of the front line hours ago. There was no front line anymore, only pockets of resistance swallowed by the storm. Yet the orders never ceased. Batteries were redirected, fire patterns recalibrated, and counteroffensives launched wherever the faintest signal of Imperial life still flickered. Somewhere behind the maelstrom, the Baneblade still fought. Its hull was cracked and blackened, its armor rent by unholy fire, but the machine spirit roared with fury and pain, unwilling to fall. Each of its shots was a statement, an act of defiance shouted into the face of gods and demons alike. Each explosion that followed was a hymn to endurance, and across from it, the corrupted knight still advanced. Its gait had slowed, one of its legs shattered and trailing molten metal, but its hatred burned undiminished. Warp light streamed from the fractures in its armor, spilling into the storm like liquid malice. Every step it took made the world groan. Between them, the guard fought on foot, caught in the wake of titans. They moved through ruins and firestorms, silhouettes illuminated by the constant pulse of lightning. The air reeked of ozone and blood. Las fire cut through the gloom in steady bursts, methodical, disciplined, unrelenting. When one guardsman fell, another stepped forward to take their place. When squads were obliterated by enemy fire, their comrades advanced over the ashes without hesitation. The Astra Militarum did not fight for victory now. They fought to exist. Father Halvain waded through the chaos like a figure from a dream. His robes were torn, his censer long since lost, yet his voice still carried above the storm. The words of his hymns were half swallowed by the thunder, but the soldiers heard them all the same, not as sound, but as rhythm, an echo of faith that beat in time with their hearts. Wherever he passed, men stood straighter, rifles steadier. There were no miracles here, only the endurance of belief. The commissar reached the ridge that overlooked the plain below, or what was left of it. The land had been reshaped by the fury of gods and machines, craters as deep as cathedrals, trenches filled with fire, the corpses of tanks half buried in molten rock. Through the veil of smoke, he saw it, the Baneblade and the Knight locked in their final embrace. The traitor machine's great chainsword had impaled the Baneblade through its side, carving a wound that glowed with molten steel. Yet the Imperial behemoth refused to fall. Its main cannon, shattered beyond function, fired one last time, its final shell loaded by a dying crewman whose blood still slicked the command console. The shot struck true. For a moment, the world froze. The explosion that followed tore through the storm like divine wrath, shattering the sky with light. The night was split apart, its core rupturing into a pillar of fire that reached toward the heavens. Its death scream echoed through the Vox and the minds of all who still lived, a sound that was neither mechanical nor human. Then the silence came. The storm began to unravel. The clouds peeled back, torn apart by unseen hands. The lightning dimmed to a distant flicker, the thunder fading into nothing. Dust and ash settled slowly over the battlefield, blanketing the dead in a pale shroud. For the first time in days, sunlight pierced the gloom. It was faint, weak, filtered through the haze, but it was light nonetheless. The commissar lowered his blade. Around him, the survivors began to emerge, faces blackened by soot, eyes hollow but alive. They moved among the ruins of their comrades, pulling the wounded from wrecks, marking the dead with torn strips of cloth. The air still hummed with residual energy, the remnants of the warp's touch, but the storm itself was broken. Father Halvain appeared beside him, limping, his face streaked with ash. The priest's gaze swept across the plain below, where the Baneblade lay motionless amid the wreckage. Its once mighty hull now lay split open like a cathedral gutted by fire. The commissar said nothing, but he understood what the priest was thinking. It had done its duty. Every soldier there had. As the light grew, the full scale of the devastation became clear. The battlefield stretched for miles in every direction, nothing but ash, twisted metal, and silence. Yet amidst that silence, The faintest sound persisted, the steady, rhythmic pulse of marching boots. The guard still lived. Squad by squad, regiment by regiment, they reassembled their formations. Standards were raised once more, the banners torn but not destroyed. The Vox channels crackled with reports of survivors, small, scattered pockets of resistance that had held out through the storm's worst fury. And as the army gathered, something shifted. The fear that had haunted them since the storm's arrival began to fade. In its place came something quieter, deeper, resolve. The storm had tested them, stripped them bare, shown them the full depth of human fragility. And still, they had endured. The commissar stood before the assembled remnants, his voice carrying across the wind-swept plain. There was no grand speech, no promise of reward or rest, only a single, cold truth that every soldier already knew. The war was not over. It never would be. But for this moment, for this day, they had endured. The priest lifted his gaze to the heavens, where the last traces of the storm still flickered like dying embers. He whispered a final prayer, not for victory, but for remembrance. The sun crept higher, glinting off the shattered armor of tanks. The lasguns clutched in weary hands, the helmets laid upon the ground in tribute to the fallen. The guard had survived the storm, but far beyond Vortania's horizon, new fires were already rising. When the guns finally fell silent, the world seemed to forget how to breathe. The battlefield lay still beneath a sickly dawn, its surface blackened and cracked like scorched parchment. Smoke drifted in languid ribbons across the plain, mingling with the scent of promethium and death. The storm had ended, yet its echoes clung to everything: the air, the earth, even the souls of those who had endured it. In that silence, the survivors began to move. They emerged from trenches half collapsed, from the gutted shells of chimeras, from holes dug into the ash to escape bombardment. Men and women who had seen too much and lost even more. They moved with the slow, deliberate rhythm of those who no longer trusted the world to remain still. Each step stirred the dust of the dead, and each breath carried the metallic tang of victory, poisoned by grief. The commissar walked among them. His coat was shredded, his cap gone, his face streaked with grime and blood, but his eyes still burned with the same merciless light. He did not speak as he passed through the ranks. There was nothing to say. The soldiers saluted him in silence. Everywhere he looked, the toll of survival was laid bare. Medici tents hastily erected from torn tarps and armor plates. Wounded men lying in rows, their bodies covered in field dressings, their faces pale beneath the soot. Priests walking among them, murmuring benedictions over those whose souls already hovered on the edge of the Emperor's light. Father Halvain moved among the dying like a shadow of faith made flesh. His voice never rose, yet every word seemed to reach those who needed it most. He knelt beside a guardsman who had lost both legs, his hand resting lightly on the man's brow. The soldier's eyes flickered once, then closed. Halvain crossed himself, his fingers tracing the sign of the aquila, and moved on. Not far from the ridge, the remains of the Baneblade still smoldered. Its hull had cooled, but the ground around it remained scorched, its metal twisted and warped from the final explosion. The commissar stood before it for a long time. The once proud war machine, whose name had been Gloria Invictus, was now nothing more than wreckage. Yet even in ruin, it retained a certain majesty, a monument to defiance carved in steel and sacrifice. He could almost imagine the voices of the crew echoing faintly within, carried by the wind. They had not died screaming. They had died roaring. He ordered a perimeter established around the wreck. It would remain there as a shrine until new orders came. No scavenger, no enemy, no time itself would take that honor from them. As the hours passed, the survivors worked in grim coordination. The dead were gathered with reverence, their bodies laid side by side, their dog tags collected and recorded. Those too disfigured to be recognized were still given names: brother, sister, soldier of the Emperor. For every 100 who had marched into Vortania, scarcely 20 now remained. The wind carried no sound but the shuffle of boots and the faint murmur of prayers. Then, at midday, the silence broke. A transmission crackled through the Vox, a faint, broken signal carried across the wastes. It came from deep within the storm's aftermath, somewhere beyond the far ridge. The voice was barely human, distorted by static, but the message was clear enough. There were survivors, cut off, surrounded, running out of ammunition. The commissar did not hesitate. Within minutes, orders were given. Squads rearmed, engines sputtered back to life, banners were raised once more. The soldiers, exhausted and hollow-eyed, moved without question. It was the way of the Guard. There was no rest while others still fought. As the rescue force descended into the valley, the silence deepened once more. The light grew dim, and the air took on a strange, metallic taste. The ground beneath their boots began to pulse faintly, as if something beneath the surface still lived, breathing slowly in the dark. The Vox interference returned, a low hum that grew sharper the farther they advanced. And then the first corpse was found, not Imperial, nor human. It was something else. The body lay half buried in the ash, its armour a fusion of flesh and metal, its face twisted into a rictus of agony and triumph. The symbols carved into its plating still glowed faintly with warped light. The priest who saw it whispered a prayer, but his voice faltered halfway through. The thing's eyes opened for an instant, then turned to dust. The commissar felt the unease ripple through the ranks, like a physical thing. The storm might have broken, but what it had brought lingered still. The warp's touch did not fade so easily. They found the survivors hours later, holed up in a ruined bunker surrounded by the corpses of the enemy. Only a handful remained, their minds half broken, their eyes wide and unseeing. One of them spoke the same words over and over, a whisper that became a chant. The ground remembers. The ground remembers. When questioned, he could say nothing more. The commissar ordered the bunker sealed. No one would dig further into the earth. Whatever had happened beneath the storm's eye was beyond mortal understanding. As night fell once more, the camp grew quiet. Fires burned low. The stars were hidden behind a veil of dust. Father Halvain stood upon the ridge, gazing into the horizon. He knew what the others feared to voice, that the storm had not simply come from the warp. It had touched this place, marked it, left something behind. The Emperor's light had burned through the darkness, yes, but in doing so, it had revealed shadows far deeper than any had known. Below him, the Guard slept in shifts, their dreams restless and uneasy. The commissar did not sleep at all. His eyes remained fixed on the plains, watching the faint flicker of ghostly light that still danced in the distance. Victory had come at a cost, it always did, and somewhere beneath the ash, something still stirred. The first signs came with the dawn. The air felt wrong, not in the way of storms or warp-born corruption, but subtly, insidiously. The wind carried no sound, no rustle of ash, no whisper of movement. Even the banners stood still, as though the world itself held its breath. The Guard awoke to that silence, and though none dared to speak it aloud, they felt the weight of it pressing down on their chests. Something had changed. The commissar made his rounds in the half-light, boots crunching through the fine grey dust that now coated everything like snow. His soldiers saluted as he passed, though the motions were slower than usual, their eyes clouded by fatigue and something deeper, unease. They had faced storms, demons, and death without flinching. But this silence, this emptiness, it gnawed at them in ways no enemy ever could. The Mechanicus teams had begun their work at first light, combing through the wrecks left by the battle. What they found troubled even them. The earth beneath the battlefield pulsed faintly, like a dying heart. Every machine spirit that had fought here, tank, gunship, or armor plate, seemed to hum with residual warp resonance. Binary prayers did little to soothe them. One tech priest reported hearing whispers in the vox frequencies, voices that spoke in fragmented invocations of pain and devotion. The commissar had the reports burned. He had no time for superstition, even when superstition took the shape of truth. Yet he could not deny what his own eyes saw. The ash shifted sometimes when no wind blew. The earth gave faint tremors with no artillery to cause them, and now and then, just at the edge of sight, faint lights flickered through the haze, green, blue, and violet, dancing where no fires burned. By midday, one of the forward squads failed to report in. A patrol sent to investigate returned an hour later, pale and trembling. They found the squad's equipment arranged neatly in a circle, their lasguns polished, their helmets lined in a perfect ring upon the ground. There were no bodies, no blood, not even footprints leading away. Only the faint smell of ozone, sharp and metallic, hung in the air. The commissar said nothing. He ordered the area quarantined and moved the camp's perimeter inward. That night, Father Halvain gathered the troops by the fires. His voice carried softly over the encampment, a steady murmur that broke through the growing dread. He spoke of scars, the ones that could be seen and those that could not, of how the Emperor's light was not merely meant to destroy the darkness, but to endure within it. His words steadied them, as they always did, yet even he seemed changed. His eyes lingered on the horizon too often, and when the firelight flickered across his face, the shadows beneath his eyes seemed deeper than before. Later, alone, he prayed before a makeshift altar of scavenged metal and burned icons. The censer he once carried was gone, but he lit fragments of promethium shells in its place. Their flames burned a sickly green, sputtering as though fighting to stay alive. In the distance, the earth groaned. By the second night, more soldiers vanished. No alarms were triggered, no signs of struggle. Tents stood empty, their contents undisturbed. The commissar doubled the watch and forbade any movement beyond the inner line without escort. He knew the men were afraid, though they hid it well. Discipline could command bodies, but not hearts. At dawn, the Mechanicus discovered something buried beneath the ash near the edge of the plateau, a structure vast and ancient. Its surface was black stone, marked with sigils so old that even the cog priests' data archives held no record of them. Faint light pulsed within the cracks, and the air above it shimmered like heat haze. The priest overseeing the dig declared it a ruin of pre-imperial origin, perhaps even Xenos. He insisted it be studied. The commissar gave him permission and assigned 3 squads of guardsmen to watch over the site, their orders clear. Nothing emerges without sanction. By midday, the first of them began to hear the voices. At first, it was only faint static in their vox units, barely perceptible beneath the background hum. Then came whispers that spoke their names, urging them to come closer to the stone, to place their hands upon its surface. One soldier obeyed before anyone could stop him. The moment his palm touched the stone, his body convulsed violently, and every light in the camp flickered out. When they returned, he was gone. No body, no blood, nothing. Only a smear of ash where he had stood. The Mechanicus sealed the ruin immediately. The Commissar ordered the entire dig site purged with promethium. The fire burned high and bright, but when it died, the stone still stood untouched. That night, the wind returned. It howled across the plains, carrying with it the faint sound of distant chanting, low and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of something vast and unseen. The soldiers whispered prayers beneath their breath, clutching their weapons as though they could drive away the sound by will, alone. Father Halvain stood upon the ridge once more, his robes billowing in the cold wind, his gaze fixed upon the glowing ruin below. He had seen such omens before, in dreams, in scripture, in the hidden corners of faith, where the line between divine and damnation blurred. The Emperor's light could banish many things, but not all. He knelt, pressing his hand to the earth. Beneath his palm, the ground trembled faintly, alive, aware. Something slept beneath Vortania, something old, something that had woken when the storm broke. The Commissar stood not far behind him, his hand resting on his pistol, his expression unreadable. He did not speak, for both men already understood what the other thought. The battle had been won, the storm defeated. But Vortania was not cleansed. It was becoming. The wind rose again, carrying the distant echo of laughter, or perhaps screams. It was impossible to tell. The Guard would endure, as they always had. But this was no longer a war against flesh and steel. It was a war against something far more insidious, the corruption of reality itself. The Emperor's light burned within them still, but the shadows beneath the ash were deep, and they were moving. The ruin pulsed. At first, it was a faint, almost imperceptible tremor, a soft rhythm beneath the ash, like the heartbeat of the world itself. But as the hours passed, it grew stronger. The ground vibrated in steady intervals, dust shivering across the surface, metal fragments chiming faintly in time with the unseen pulse. It came not from above, nor from any distance, but from below. Deep beneath the plains of Vortania, something vast stirred. The Mechanicus denied it. To them, such tremors were simply the byproduct of seismic instability, a natural consequence of orbital bombardment and tectonic stress. They brought auspex arrays and seismic sensors, speaking in binaric tongues, to justify their disbelief. Yet even their instruments betrayed them. The readings made no sense. Energy spikes formed geometric patterns, harmonics repeated at unnatural intervals. And always, the rhythm remained steady, as though following a deliberate cadence. The Commissar listened to their reports in silence. He knew what they feared to say aloud, that it was no longer the world trembling, but reality itself. By dusk, the first of the strange phenomena began anew. Lights flickered across the encampment, not the steady glow of lumen lamps, but faint orbs that drifted through the air like embers caught in a breeze. They pulsed in rhythm with the tremors, each flash synchronized, as though the world itself exhaled light. Soldiers stared, transfixed, until the Commissar's barked command broke the spell. He ordered all personnel to remain within line formation, all weapons primed, all Vox units tuned to encrypted frequency. It was then that the whispering began again. Not through the Vox this time, but in the air itself. Faint, distant, echoing through the wind. Some heard their names, others heard prayers, words spoken in ancient Gothic, promising deliverance and peace. A few claimed to hear the voices of the dead, comrades lost in the storm calling for them to come closer, to listen. The commissar shot the first man who broke formation. It was not an act of cruelty, but mercy. Father Halvain spent that night in constant prayer. His voice, hoarse from exhaustion, carried through the flickering glow of the campfires. He recited the litany of endurance, the psalm of binding, even fragments of forbidden catechisms that brushed too close to the edge of heresy. But none silenced the trembling earth. The ruins' glow deepened, bleeding through the cracks in the ground like veins of molten light. By morning, a chasm had opened around the ruin. It stretched for hundreds of meters, a wound carved into the earth. The edges glowed with faint blue luminescence, and from its depths came the sound of distant chanting, inhuman, resonant, impossibly vast. The priests declared it an echo of the warp. The tech priests called it a data signal too complex for comprehension. Neither were wrong. The commissar ordered the perimeter fortified. Trenches were dug in concentric circles, gun emplacements established, and every soldier assigned a sector. Yet the defenses felt meaningless. How could one defend against sound, against light that moved like liquid thought? Reports began to filter in from the outer watch. Shadows moving without bodies. Lasgun batteries discharging on their own. Equipment bending, reshaping, melting, as though the metal remembered another form. One soldier swore he saw his reflection in a cracked visor smile back at him, though his own face had not moved. By the second night, the ruins sang. The sound began as a low hum, then rose into a harmonic vibration that filled the air with unbearable resonance. Every piece of metal in the camp quivered in sympathy, the vibrations building until the air itself seemed ready to shatter. Men fell to their knees, hands pressed to their ears, blood trickling from their noses. Vox units screamed with static. Through it all, Father Halvain stood before the chasm, his arms raised, his voice lost amid the thunder. He did not speak in low Gothic, nor in any tongue known to the Imperium. The words poured from him in a torrent of sound, half prayer, half invocation, fighting to drown the ruined song with faith. The storm of sound broke against his defiance, and for a heartbeat, the world fell silent. Then, the chasm erupted in light. A column of brilliance shot into the sky, piercing the clouds, tearing through the ash and smoke. The glow spread across the plains, illuminating every scar of the battlefield in unearthly hues. The soldiers shielded their eyes as the ruin below them unfurled like a blooming flower of stone and fire. What emerged from the depths defied reason. It was not a structure, nor a creature, but something between the two, vast and angular, its surface rippling as though alive. Symbols older than language shifted across its form, rearranging themselves in patterns that burned to look upon. Its presence pressed against the world like a physical weight. The very air seemed to bend around it, light warping, sound distorting. Somewhere within its glow, shapes moved, shadows given form, flickering at the edge of vision. The air reeked of ozone and incense, of rust and blood. The ruin was no longer dormant. It was awake. The commissar gave the order to fire. Every gun in range unleashed its fury. Last fire, autocannon bursts, heavy bolter rounds, an entire regiment's wrath poured into the abyss. The ruin absorbed it all. Each impact sank into its surface like rain striking water, rippling outward before vanishing entirely. Then came the retaliation. A wave of force rippled outward, invisible but irresistible. Men were hurled through the air like ragdolls, tanks thrown onto their sides, fortifications flattened. The sound that followed was not thunder, nor explosion. It was a voice, vast and ancient, layered in 1,000 tones. The commissar staggered to his feet, his ears bleeding, his vision blurred. Around him, soldiers screamed prayers, clutching their aquilus as the world bent and groaned. Above the ruin, the column of light began to twist, coiling like a serpent, tearing open the very sky. Through that wound in reality, something peered back. For a moment, the commissar glimpsed it, a vast eye, burning with the color of madness, its gaze filled not with malice, but with recognition, as though it had been waiting for centuries for this moment. And in that gaze, he understood the terrible truth. The storm of Vortania had not created the ruin. It had awakened it. The war had been nothing more than a trigger, a ritual written in blood and sacrifice. Every death, every bombardment, every scream had been fuel. The ruin had been calling out across the Imperium, and now something had answered. The commissar raised his sword once more, its edge glinting in the unholy light. He felt no fear, no hesitation, only grim resolve. He had fought demons, storms, traitors, and nightmares. This would be no different. He gave the only order that mattered. Hold the line. And the Astra Militarum obeyed. They fired into the light, into the heart of the impossible, their faith burning brighter than the warp itself. The sky was breaking. The column of light that speared upward from the ruin had become a storm of its own, a cyclone of brilliance that tore the heavens asunder. The clouds above were no longer grey, but a maelstrom of shifting color, crimson, violet, and gold swirling in patterns that defied nature. Lightning of every hue split the sky, striking the ground with the fury of gods long forgotten. The earth buckled beneath the weight of it all, trembling as though caught in the throes of birth or death. The ruin had become a gateway. From its heart poured torrents of energy, cascading in radiant streams that twisted the air and turned matter to dust. Through the blinding glare, figures began to emerge, spectral shapes that shimmered with malevolent grace, their forms flickering between flesh and flame. They were not demons in the crude, monstrous sense. They were ideas given form, echoes of forgotten faiths, their faces both human and alien, beautiful and terrible. The soldiers of the Astra Militarum did not falter. Their lines held, battered though they were, lasguns blazing until the barrels glowed red hot. Vox channels screamed with overlapping voices, orders, prayers, the static roar of interference. Tanks fired into the light, shells detonating in blinding bursts that vanished before impact. The ruined surface rippled with each strike, as though mocking their efforts. The commissar strode through the chaos like a shadow of iron. His greatcoat was torn, his face streaked with ash and blood, but his eyes burned with purpose. Around him, men and women fought not for victory, but for meaning, for the simple, terrible refusal to surrender. And in their defiance, there was beauty. Father Halvain stood upon the ridge, framed by the storm. His robes were tattered, his body trembling with exhaustion, but his voice did not waver. The litanies he chanted now were not found in any sanctioned text. They came from a place deeper than doctrine, a place of pure, desperate faith. His words carried through the wind, weaving around the sounds of battle, and for a fleeting moment, the ruined song faltered. The commissar saw it. A hesitation in the light, a flicker of resistance. He raised his sword, the power field sputtering and crackling, its edge now little more than a thread of light against the void. His voice cut through the din, not as command, but as declaration. The soldiers rallied to it, their voices rising in a single, thunderous cry that rolled across the plains. The Astra Militarum, humanity's shield and hammer, stood unyielding against the impossible, The ruins screamed. The sound was not heard but felt, a vibration that tore through flesh and stone alike. The ground split open, revealing glimpses of an ocean of light beneath, shifting and alive. From its depths rose a shape so vast it defied comprehension, its outline fractured, its presence a contradiction of all physical laws. The world bent around it, mountains seeming to tilt toward it, rivers of molten earth flowing upward as gravity itself bowed in submission. The commissar's mind buckled beneath the weight of its gaze. Memories flickered before his eyes, battles fought, comrades lost, oaths sworn and broken. For a moment, he saw every world that the Imperium had ever lost, every nameless soldier buried in ash. And then he saw why they fought. Not for victory, not for glory, but because if they did not, there would be nothing left worth saving. The ruins' light reached for him, tendrils of energy spiraling like serpents of glass. He did not retreat. He stepped forward, his boots crunching through the burning ash, his sword raised high. At his side, Father Halvane's voice rose to a crescendo, every syllable burning with faith so fierce it scorched the very air. His flesh blackened, his body consumed by the prayer, but his voice did not falter. The words became light, pure and searing, merging with the commissar's final charge. The ruin convulsed, the light around it imploded, collapsing inward in a single, blinding instant. The world seemed to inhale, every sound, every scream, every echo drawn into that singular point of radiance. Then came silence. And then, detonation. The plains of Vortania vanished in a storm of fire and brilliance. Mountains melted. Rivers of molten stone carved new valleys through the world's skin. The sky itself burned white, then black, then nothing. When the light finally faded, there was only stillness. The ruin was gone. The chasm sealed. The storm had ended. All that remained of the regiment were fragments, half-buried banners fluttering weakly in the wind, the twisted remains of tanks and trenches, and the faint scent of incense lingering in the air. For weeks afterward, orbital Auspex scans reported no sign of life across the continent. Yet sometimes, in the depths of the Vox channels, faint transmissions would flicker through, garbled, fragmented, impossible to trace. They spoke of light, of endurance, of men and women who stood against the dark, and among those echoes, one voice was heard more clearly than the rest. Calm, commanding, eternal. Hold the line. It was said that Vortania never recovered. The planet became a dead world, scarred and uninhabitable, its name purged from Imperial records. But the legend of the soldiers who fought there, of the Guard who faced the storm and the ruin both, spread across the segmentum like a whispered prayer. They called it the last light of Vortania. And in the endless wars that followed, when the darkness seemed too vast and the Emperor's light too faint, soldiers would murmur those words before battle, not as a boast, but as a vow. Hold the line. For in the Imperium of man, there is no victory without sacrifice, and no faith without fire. The hammer of the Emperor never breaks, it endures, always.